At 6:30 on a Saturday morning in 1967, a 10-year-old boy creeps silently down the hall, and so as not to wake anyone, carefully shuts the door, separating the living room from the bedrooms, and turns the television on low volume. He's been looking forward to the new fall lineup of cartoons that will be debuting. Cartoons like George of the Jungle, Samson and Goliath, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and Fantastic Four. Especially Fantastic Four. About a super family who use their superpowers to protect the Earth against a host of villains. One of the superheroes, Johnny Storm, also known as the Human Torch, could engulf his entire body in flames. He could fly, absorb fire, and control nearby fire. And every time the Human Torch was about to spring into action, he would shout, "Flame on!" It was all pretty exciting for a 10-year-old boy. In this morning's text, Jesus describes himself as a sort of human torch when he says, "I've come to start a fire on this earth, and how I wish it were blazing right now." The Jesus portrayed by Luke in this morning's passage sounds nothing like the meek and mild Prince of Peace who dandles toddlers on his knee. This Jesus is a fire starter, and not the gentle, warm fire by the hearth either. No, his is a wild, consuming fire that reshapes everything in its path. Now that may make you a bit uncomfortable, but Jesus wasn't interested in making things nice or pleasant. He came to disrupt the status quo, not to make peace with it. He confronted the harmful systems and structures that kept people divided and oppressed. He knew that things had to heat up before people would wake up. And sometimes the old ways need to be burned off before healing and transformation can occur. Take certain pine trees, for instance, that rely on fire for their reproduction. These pine species have developed a remarkable adaptation to fire. Their pine cones are sealed by a resin that melts only at the high temperatures produced during a wildfire. When the resin melts, the cone scales open, releasing the seeds onto the forest floor. The fire also creates favorable conditions for the seeds by reducing competition from other trees that have been burned away, thus making way for new growth. The fire Jesus spoke of was also one that transforms the spiritual landscape into something new, because it's the fire of unconditional divine love, a love that welcomes immigrants, one that affirms LGBTQ plus identities, a love that dismantles racism. And we all know what happens when that kind of love begins to sweep across the land, don't we? We get the sort of pushback we're experiencing today. Families and faith communities split, and oppressive laws are proposed when people resist others who choose to follow the path of compassion and advocate for equity. The way Jesus described it was, from now on, when you find 5 in a house, it will be 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. Father against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against bride and bride against mother-in-law. He never set out with that as his goal. Jesus didn't come for the purpose of dividing family members against each other. It's just something that happens when some people value tradition and the way we've always done it over new ways designed to create a culture of inclusion. Division springs up out of a fear of scarcity and a distrust of the unfamiliar. But there will always be the person who acts surprised and innocent with the chaos that inevitably ensues. We didn't see that one coming, they say. I was voting for less government red tape, but I didn't realize they were going to take away your rights. But Jesus called those people frauds. And most translations say hypocrites. If you can read the signs of the weather, you can certainly read the signs of the times, he said. I grew up in South Louisiana before there were such things as computer models to predict the likely path of a hurricane, when households were left to our own predictions. When a tropical storm formed in the Atlantic, we would begin plotting its coordinates on a map that the local newspaper provided at the beginning of each hurricane season. Based on the direction in which it seemed to be heading, we knew whether or not to pull out the boarding that fit perfectly over the windows. Batteries and candles were purchased, bathtubs were filled with water, and trash cans were tied down for good measure. We made all these preparations based on the signs of the weather. Jesus was telling the crowds, if they had enough sense to likewise read the skies for signs of approaching storms, then surely they could sense the winds of change that were blowing across the land. And I suspect he would tell us the same thing today. When Roe v. Wade was overturned 3 years ago and Justice Clarence Thomas said the Supreme Court should reconsider its past rulings in support of contraception access, same-sex relationships, and same-sex marriage, Jesus would likely tell us to not act so surprised that now the Supreme Court is being formally asked to overturn marriage equality, because after all, the signs were there all along. And why all the fresh outrage over Project 2025 when it was formalized and published years ago in anticipation of Donald Trump winning the presidential election? The signs of resistance to God's kingdom have been there all along, Jesus would say. At the beginning of his ministry, when Jesus said he had been anointed by God to preach good news to the poor, to proclaim release to prisoners, and to liberate the oppressed, he was talking about an upheaval of oppressive systems and power structures. He was talking about burning away the old to make way for the new. And he is inviting you and me to join him as people of the fire and storm. And that means embodying fierce love that confronts injustice without hatred. It means embracing vulnerability when relationships become strained over truth-telling. And it means building communities that welcome disruption as a path to transformation. I never would have imagined that the disruption of the COVID pandemic, along with a break-in at our church, would bring about a transformation in my own life. Throughout the worst days of COVID, I continued to keep office hours because our HIV food pantry was designated as an essential service. One day I arrived to find evidence that someone had climbed through an unsecured window, helped themselves to some of the food from our pantry, and grabbed one of the crocheted Afghans in our social hall to make themselves comfortable while they slept away an evening out of the weather. It was suggested that we construct a small outdoor pantry so people wouldn't have to break into the church to get food. And thanks to Marlene's carpentry skills, we soon had a nice food pantry that continues to serve the neighborhood. It's a neighborhood of people who have become extensions of this congregation. Tough, courageous survivors who give more to me than I could ever give to them. But it only happened because we were open to the Spirit's disruption of our daily routines. It only happened when we built a food pantry instead of plotting how to protect ourselves from outsiders. When we allowed the love of Christ to burn away the fear of a mostly invisible community who can make a person uncomfortable if we look too long into their eyes. It only happened when we became people of the fire. The fire that Jesus spoke of in this morning's text is not destruction for its own sake, but creative, renewing energy. The division he talked about was not a goal toward which he aimed his ministry, but a natural consequence of it. May we be people who do not fear the fire, but rather welcome it as the Spirit's work in us and through us. May our hearts be set ablaze with God's justice and peace. May we find courage to face division with grace, and may the fire of God burn brightly within us until all creation is turned right side up. Flame on. Amen.
Amen.